Welcome and good evening. Thank you everybody for attending our online earthquake preparedness webinar presentation, Earthquakes, Why We Need to Be Personally Prepared with Alison Bird. My name is Howie Siemens and I am the Manager of Emergency Programs for the Comox Valley Emergency Program, administered by the Comox Valley Regional District. The emergency program supports a number of areas within the Comox Valley, including the regional district electoral areas, the city of Courtenay, Comox First Nation, the town of Comox, the village of Cumberland. I want to start today by respectfully acknowledging the lands on which we gather to host this webinar is on the traditional unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. Today I'm here with our CBRD Communications Department who will be supporting me through the webinar. Before I introduce tonight's presenter, I'm going to offer a little bit of a Zoom 101 to get started. This session is being recorded so we can post on our websites for others to view who may not be able to attend tonight. As we have a large group here, I think we're up to 90 with us today. Everyone except the speaker are muted to ensure there is no disruptions or background noises are kept minimal. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. For those of you joining us online, you can enter questions into the Q&A found at the bottom of your Zoom window at this time. However, we will also answer questions at the end of the presentation. You'll be able to see the questions if you notice that someone else has a question. We would also like you to that you'd like answered. You can please add your support to that question by clicking the thumbs up under the question. As we are recording this webinar presentation, when you ask a question via the Q&A, please tick the box to make sure you are yourself is anonymous. Otherwise, you'll be identified by your Zoom name. If you have any technical questions or need assistance during your presentation, please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to connect with either Ingrid, Sly, or Matt Bell, who are the communications people who are supporting me tonight. If you require a phone number to call in, you can call them at 250-334-6087. Again, 250-334-6087, and they'll be happy to help you. We have entered this number into the chat as it will help you reference it from that point. We'd be happy to troubleshoot you any issues that may occur. Now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Alison Bird has been working as an earthquake seismologist since 1997, initially with an International Seismology Center in England, and since 2000 with Natural Resources Canada. For 20 years, she analyzed and researched Western Canada's earthquakes and visited Haida Gwaii as part of a response team after the 2012 magnitude 7.8 earthquake. In recent years, she was part of a team developing a comprehensive risk assessment for Canada. Alison routinely responds in the wake of significant events, having roughly done over 900 interviews. In 2020, Alison joined the Earthquake Early Warning Project as a liaison and outreach officer, helping to establish the EEW system for Canada. She's involved in numerous outreach activities and is passionate about seismic and risk engineering and encouraging mitigation practice for at-risk communities and in educating the public about earthquake hazards. She's on the board of directors for the BC Earthquake Alliance and on the organizing committee for the annual Great BC Shakeout Earthquake Drill. This is a quick snap of extensive work and contributions she has provided over many years of her passion towards seismology in earthquake preparedness. So I'd like this opportunity to welcome Alison Bird and her presentation. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Howie. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if we can get this going. Okay, get it in presenter mode. Oops. There. I hope everyone can see me okay. And and hear, well, more importantly, see my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about earthquakes, hazards, and Shakeout BC. My friends like to call me Little Miss Disaster. But the thing is, I want to be clear that earthquakes are not like what they are in the movies. They're not nearly as catastrophic. They are survivable, and there are a lot of things I'm going to talk about so that you can be safe in an earthquake. I think, you know, we're very lucky in where we live. We have a strong building code. Earthquakes in Canada. We have a strong Indigenous history of earthquakes over the past centuries, in fact, millennia, especially on the West Coast. But we've been instrumentally monitoring since 1898, over 100 years, but that's really a drop in the bucket when it comes to geophysics. Our national network records over 3,000 earthquakes a year in British Columbia. The largest earthquakes occur, of course, along that West Coast. And we also record significant earthquakes in Yukon Territory, Quebec, and Ontario. So all this data helps to inform the National Building Code of Canada. This is based on recorded earthquakes plus faults that we know are potentially active or are active. There was the modern code for safety, for life safety regarding earthquakes in the 1970s, but there have been significant improvements in the code since then, especially in the mid 80s and in 2000. So earthquakes in BC. For me, this is the place to be an earthquake seismologist. We've got all three major types of plate boundary right off our coastline. The Juan de Fuca Ridge, which is this little ridge here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, between the Pacific Plate and the Juan de Fuca Plate is where the two oceanic plates are moving apart. As they move apart, the gap opens up, material comes up from the mantle, fills in the gap, cools and becomes new plate. Now, this sort of system produces only small earthquakes and they're well offshore, so they don't really present much of a hazard to us here. However, we do get significant earthquakes along the west coast of Haida Gwaii, along the Queen Charlotte Fault. We've had two of the largest earthquakes recorded on instruments in Canada. One was an 8.1 in 1949, and the other was the magnitude 7.8 in 2012. We also have the northern end of the Cascadia subduction zone off the coast of Vancouver Island. This is where an oceanic plate pushes beneath a continental plate. The continental plate is the North America plate. That's the one you're living on. And subduction zones are where you get the largest earthquakes in the world. They're quite dramatic events. Ours is about 1,100 kilometers long. It extends from Vancouver Island down into Northern California. So it's quite a significant event when that sort of ruptures. The last time it ruptured was in 1700 and about a magnitude 9 earthquake. This is recorded in the Indigenous histories, but also in various geophysical evidence and in Japanese histories of the tsunami that landed there that year. So earthquakes, while they're not happening right now on the while they're not happening on the subduction zone, they are happening within the two plates. They're happening in the North America plate, that one you're living on, and also in the subducting Juan de Fuca plate as it pushes its way down into the mantle. I wanted to show you a very short clip. It's short because this is from Kobe, from the earthquake that happened there. It's short because they lost power, and this is from one of those security cameras in a store. It's only less than 10 seconds long. The shaking actually continued for a full minute and a half. So I'll show you that quickly. Sorry, it's very grainy, but you get a good idea of the movement. It's very strong horizontal movement, side to side, rather than things jumping up and down. And I should stress that the strongest waves in an earthquake are horizontal, and you're used to the vertical pull of gravity. So it's quite an unusual movement. So a couple of recent large events, well, I shouldn't say recent, it's 1946, but the 1946 earthquake near Courtenay, Comox, so right up near you guys, was a magnitude 7.3. The colors on this map show the intensity of shaking, in other words, how strongly the shaking was. Very high intensities close to that area, the epicenter, and then lower intensities as you get further and further away from the earthquake. But this was felt as far as the Rocky Mountains and down into Oregon State, so quite wide-reaching. There was a fair amount of damage on Vancouver Island and some of the adjacent mainland. Typical damage, the Courtenay Elementary School in the upper picture there, the chimney broke off at the roof line, fell through the school roof and landed in a classroom. So you can see why we tell people to get underneath furniture to drop, cover, and hold on, because you want to protect yourself from that falling debris. And that lower image there is a house that was essentially shoved off its foundation. Remember those strong side-to-side motions? It pushed the house, so it slid off its foundation. Now, this is the last major earthquake we had in this region. And that was quite a while ago. But I need to stress to you, in the first half of the 20th century, there were several large earthquakes in this area. So despite the fact that there's been a number of earthquakes, there haven't been any very recently. And unfortunately, this has lulled people into a false sense of security. Also, Haida Gwaii had a magnitude 7.8, 2012. I went up there afterwards. My colleagues, Lucinda and Yan, visited these inlets because it was modeled that these would be the places where there might be evidence of the tsunami. If you're a boater, you know that if there's a storm or anything like that, you tend to go into an inlet or a harbor for protection. But in tsunami situations, that's actually where tsunami waves get concentrated and they get worse. They build up in height and they get quite ferocious. So they went to these inlets and they found evidence of tsunami. They found seaweed hanging in the branches of trees. They found logs on the forest floor that had been shifted. They found fish on the forest floor. And they found a lot of debris from Japan because the previous year in 2011, there'd been the Tohoku earthquake off Japan. And unfortunately, that had a huge, very devastating tsunami, a very upsetting event, and it lifted a lot of very light material off the coastline there, things like plastic bottles and floats and that sort of thing. That material was floated across the Pacific Ocean, where it was tossed into our coastline the next year. So it was sort of doubly tsunami debris. And the heights that they measured this evidence was up to about 7 meters. One area, this point of land here, which has become known as Earthquake Point, had scouring by tsunami wave action up to 13 meters. That's extremely high. Now, this was the tallest tsunami, the highest tsunami of the world in 2012. And it did cause some damage in Kahului, Hawaii. It actually made its way down that way. Thankfully, on the west coast of Haida Gwaii, there are no populated areas. And thankfully it happened, this earthquake happened at the end of October. So there weren't any people camping or kayaking on the Gwaii Hanas region. So that was very, very fortunate. So I wanted to show a few pictures of typical damage. So old brick buildings do not tend to do very well in earthquakes. What can often happen is the mortar between the bricks becomes weak from the shaking, can't hold the heavy items together, these bricks or stones, and the walls can bow out. And then what happens is that there could be a little bit of collapse of the roof. Now, collapse is actually very rare in earthquakes. A lot of people think that that's the typical damage in an earthquake, but it's not. It's actually very, very rare, especially in North American architecture. Also, this is a picture of poorly reinforced concrete. So in earlier building codes where there may not have been enough transverse or wrapped reinforcement to hold those, there's great rebar there, but it's not, there's no sort of wrapped rebar to hold things together so that those pieces can stay linear and that post can hold up the beam. So this beam is now seemingly being held up by a Coke machine. Houses, despite this image, houses tend to do very well in earthquakes. Where they tend to fail are things like the porches, poorly constructed additions, that sort of thing. The chimney, especially if it falls toward the house, is quite hazardous. So in my home, I do have a chimney. I've placed extra planking around where that chimney passes through the attic so that if the chimney falls toward the house, those bricks don't come through to the floors below and cause injury. And then finally, garages don't tend to do very well. They have that big open space on one end, so they don't have a lot of strength there. But by and large, most houses are quite habitable after an earthquake, but you may not be able to use maybe the front entryway because it's near a porch that's collapsed or something like that. There may be a part of the house that's hazardous, but often people are able to stay in their homes. Most people in North American architecture are injured by falling debris rather than structural damage. And this is on the left, a tragic image from the Napa Valley earthquake. I think about this every time I go into a liquor store, and I always wonder why they put the more expensive wines up high, because they're more likely to break in an earthquake. But that's just me thinking about earthquakes and not sales. And then on the right, you have a typical office. So light fixtures, ceiling tiles, things coming off shelves or out of cupboards, furniture shifting. This is what you need to protect yourself from most of the time in an earthquake. So this is why we want you to get underneath a table or a chair or a desk, something that's going to protect you from those falling objects. Earthquakes can also trigger secondary hazards. The left-hand image is a very sad one from San Salvador. There was very little damage from the earthquake itself, but unfortunately it triggered a landslide and just took out this 2.5 city blocks. And that's where all the losses were from that earthquake. And it was very sad. This is from Alaska. What can often happen is the subsurface can slump. This is not the fault. This is just an area where the shaking caused the ground to fail in a way, like it's like a little bit of a landslide, and it didn't support the overriding highway system. Now, you should never do what these men are doing. You should never walk over something like this, or certainly not get into something like this, because you can have an aftershock, and these big pieces of roadway could shift and you could injure yourself. Liquefaction, it's very much like when you go down to the beach and the tide's been out for some time and the sand is quite firm, but if you stand in one place and you tap your feet up and down, your feet will sink and water will come up around them. It's almost like you've created a small pool of quicksand. The same thing happens in an earthquake. You get this temporary liquid behavior in the subsurface where you've got sandy soils with some fluid in them. And the lower image is from Christchurch. There were several neighborhoods that had trouble with this. It just creates a huge mess. It's not a huge threat, but it does make a lot of roadways impassable. And you can see that some vehicles have sort of done a little bit of a nosedive into the damaged roadway, because of course that's where the heavy engine is. The upper image is from the Courtenay earthquake in Turkey. The building is no longer supported properly, so it's tilted and it's now leaning on its neighbor. So a little bit about tsunami. They are a series of ocean waves. Most of the time, they are generated by a subduction style earthquake. This is because the plate suddenly moves upwards and the entire water column above that part of the plate is shifted. And there's a lot of mass in that water. And if you think about the mass, that translates to energy and momentum. So these are very powerful waves. This is not like a regular tide or a storm surge. These waves have power to them, and that's what makes them really dangerous. Now, they can also be created by landslides, so a landslide into water or a submarine landslide. Occasionally, those are triggered by earthquakes, and other phenomena such as meteor impact or volcanic eruption. Now, this model that I'm showing doesn't show how far inland the waves will go, but it gives an idea of the timing of the waves and the strength of the wave. So that first wave is making its way around. It hits Victoria at about an hour and a quarter. It comes around and it gets caught up in the San Juan and Gulf Islands, and then makes its way around to the Strait of Georgia. So in the Strait of Georgia, there's not going to be a huge amount of flooding. I mean, low-lying areas could be flooded, but it's not going to be dramatic. It's not going to be like the outer coast of Vancouver Island. But this water action is going to be very strong, erratic currents. So you want to stay away from the beaches, marinas, and low-lying areas for some time, for hours and hours, possibly a day. I should stress, I've written it in red down below there. The first wave is usually not the highest. And it most often is like the second, third, or fourth wave that's the highest. So if you see a small wave come in and then go out again, the next wave may be significantly higher. So please do stay evacuated. A lot of people have been lost, unfortunately, because they saw that first wave come in and they've gone down to watch the next one, and unfortunately have been washed away. So If I haven't stressed it enough, tsunami are very forceful. They also carry debris, and that debris is often vehicles, parts of houses. You can see some silos in the background there. If you cannot get inland and up, do what this fellow did on the top of that building. He vertically evacuated in a sturdy building. This is how a lot of people have survived tsunami. It's a very smart thing to do. If you cannot get inland and up, do go up in a sturdy building, and you should be quite safe. I should notice here, this is just a 2.4 meter wave. The left-hand images are from Japan, from the Tohoku earthquake. The right-hand image is from Chile. They had an earthquake the year before, and a 2.4 meter wave is not that high for a tsunami, but it really created quite a bit of damage on the outer coast. And it tossed these shipping containers around like they were toys. It's really quite amazing, the power in these waves. After an earthquake, you could be without internet, electricity, sewage, water for several days, possibly even longer. Pardon me. The map here is of Christchurch, 2 weeks after their earthquake. The red areas have no utilities. The yellow areas have some. So you may be essentially camping for a while after an earthquake. And this lower left image could be part of the glamour of your life in those weeks. But you know, if you prepare yourself beforehand, you could be quite comfortable. So this is why I encourage people, put your kit together. I live on Vancouver Island also, and my kit is about a 2-week kit, probably more if I'm completely honest, because I think about earthquakes constantly. But I have that kit together, and that gives me some peace of mind. There's some great advice on how to put a kit together through Prepared BC. They have all these guides that are wonderful. There's a neighborhood preparedness guide. It's really a great idea to know your neighbors. I know that the lady over my back fence is a nurse. That's someone in my community with medical training. That could be hugely helpful. There's an old lady who lives next door to us. She lives alone. We need to go and check on her and make sure she's okay. These sorts of things provide some neighborhood resiliency, and then you can be more comfortable. I do encourage you, when you're putting your kit together, make sure the food you put in it is stuff you like to eat. I find food is a bit of a comfort, and I like spicy food. So I've got chili peppers, I've got some Indian curries in there, and that's going to provide me with some comfort in the days after an earthquake. Make sure you keep sturdy shoes and a flashlight under your bed. If an earthquake happens at night, there's going to be broken glass and other debris. It will be dark because there won't be electricity. You don't want to be walking around in bare feet or slippers in that situation. You want to be able to see where you're going. So that makes a huge difference to your safety and comfort, and it's a pretty easy thing to do. Camping equipment makes a great start to your kit. It gives you shelter, you know, should your house be uninhabitable, or if you don't have heat in your house, you pitch your tent in your living room, and then you've got a little bit of extra shelter and you could be a little bit warmer. Make sure you secure tall and heavy furniture and appliances to studs. This makes a big difference. You don't want these things shifting around. Also, make sure you store heavier items down low. You don't want things flying off shelves or off out of cupboards that are heavy. They could hit you. So the heavier items go down low, lighter items go up top. And then finally, we all know about masks. N95 masks should also be included in your kit. This photograph is Christchurch after their earthquake. This is not smoke. It is building dust, and you do not want to be breathing this stuff. At my work, we have asbestos in our building, and I certainly don't want my colleagues breathing any of that. So under everyone's desk, I've put a little bag. And in it, there's an N95 mask, a bottle of water, a glow stick, and a whistle. And that to me has made my colleagues a lot safer. During the earthquake, protect yourself. Drop cover and hold on. We all did this hopefully last month during the Great British Columbia Shakeout Earthquake Drill. If you didn't, you can do it now or after, tomorrow, whenever it's convenient, but please do practice it physically. Brains do not function well under stress, and you're likely to do the instinctive thing, which is to run. And that's one of the worst things you can do in an earthquake. It's actually quite dangerous. By doing the drop, cover, and hold on, you're creating that muscle memory, so your body will take you to a safe space during an earthquake. And you can see that sometimes if you're in different situations, you do different things, but there's a lot of information on the Shakeout BC website. Now, I showed this image before. I'd like to point out, I've circled it in blue, there's a table and chairs. So if you were in that building, and even in a building that's badly damaged like that, if you got underneath that table, you'd be actually very safe, much safer than if you tried to run out of that building in that left-hand doorway. So afterwards, take care of yourself. Execute your plan. Please don't use your telephone. If you need to get in touch with people, only use text. Phone lines get overwhelmed in an earthquake, and then people who need emergency services cannot get through to emergency services. So please don't use your phone unless you absolutely have to, and you only use text. Just assume that someone you know needs to get through to 911. Expect aftershocks. Most large earthquakes are followed by aftershocks, which can be quite large. And of course, if the shaking is strong, like it's difficult to stand, or it's long, it lasts more than a minute, please do get away from the coastline, get to high ground. Now, we have time for a poll, and I'm going to pass it over to my friends at Comox. I don't know if you need
the
me to
poll
stop.
has launched, so everybody should now have the ability to answer the questions. These are live. There's 5 questions. We'll leave it up for about 30 seconds to give everyone a chance to answer the questions. And I'll just take this time to remind everyone there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your webinar panel in Zoom. You can enter a question in there at any time, and at the end of the webinar, we'll be getting to the Q&A. Awesome. So thanks everybody for participating. I'll let Alison continue with her wonderful presentation. We've had some excellent responses here come in through the poll. You can see, Alison, that, well, I'll let you go over the answers. You're the expert.
I'm wondering if I should wait for people to finish, because I got about 56% participated. Shall we assume that this is everyone? Okay.
Yeah, we can cap it off now. So I'll just end
Okay.
the poll now. We'll see how everybody did here.
Okay. Don't want to put any pressure on anyone. Okay, so the first question, having a lot of small earthquakes are good because it releases pressure in the earth and makes the big earthquake less likely. Unfortunately, this is not true. Big earthquakes release a lot of stress. Small earthquakes do not. In fact, a colleague of mine calculated we would need about a magnitude 3.5 earthquake every 5 minutes on the subduction zone to release enough energy. And we don't have those earthquakes on the subduction zone at all. So those are big earthquakes, unfortunately, are still going to happen. In terms of feeling a big earthquake in the interior of British Columbia, when we have really large earthquakes, yes. In fact, when we have the megathrust earthquake, it is likely that people as far away as the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border might feel that earthquake. They would only feel a little bit of slow swaying, but there would still be an experience of shaking from that earthquake. If you have an earthquake and you're at home, should you get into a doorway, drop, cover, and hold on, or run outside? I'm glad to see that most people got it right. Drop, cover, and hold on. I understand the person who said get into a doorway. That's what they used to say. But we realize now that a lot of doorways in modern architecture are not structural. They don't provide very much protection. And doors can actually slam violently in an earthquake. So it really is better to drop, cover, and hold on. If you cannot get underneath something in the room you're in, get to an interior corner, squat down, and cover your head and neck. Okay, mobility device, a wheelchair. Lock, cover, hold on. Yes, you all got that right. So turn your chair away from a window. You don't want to get broken glass in your face. Lock, and if you can, cover your head and neck and squat and crouch over. And then finally, what are some of the things you should have in your emergency kit? This is great. Small toy stuffy, hard candy gum, foil blanket, flashlight, medicine, blah, 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 all of the above. There are all sorts of things you can include in your kit. And of course, considering your pets, considering your children, making sure that there's something that will distract them, maybe something that will comfort them, makes a big difference to their emotional well-being after an earthquake. We realize now we cannot simply look at the physical impacts of earthquakes. We need to look at the psychosocial impacts as well and think of the ways that we can take care of each other. Okay, great. Let me see. Okay, so I just have a few more slides because I want to tell you about my new project. So, oops, can I do this? There we go. So earthquake early warning, it's a technology that's proven effective in other countries. Japan has been using it for several years, so has Mexico. More recently, California, Oregon, and Washington have installed earthquake early warning systems. And in fact, California's system was in place in a test mode in time to record and respond to the Ridgecrest earthquake sequence. So I'm going to show you this little tiny video. So the system is triggered by the P wave. Now the P wave is the primary pressure wave. It's the fast wave. It gets to you first. And it's that little jolt or rumble you might experience. And the idea is we send the alert out before the more damaging, big horizontal shaking S wave reaches you. So that's a little demonstration of how it works. This provides usually seconds to tens of seconds of warning before that strong shaking arrives. It does not sound like very much time, but it does allow enough time for some protective measures to be taken and really can reduce the impact of an earthquake. Now, very close to an earthquake's epicenter, it may not be possible to receive the alert before the strong shaking arrives. And I need to stress, oops, this is not prediction. This is merely saying an earthquake has just been detected. Take immediate protective actions. So this is what the system looks like right now. We've got all sorts of stations that we're installing in Western BC, Eastern Ontario, and Southern Quebec. It's quite a dense network and includes very high speed, specialized sensors and communications. We're using the same software that they're using in the United States, which is great because it's been proven effective there, and it really will help facilitate sharing data across the border. We do that already, but for earthquake early warning, it's really important to get data from both sides of the border so that those earthquakes in that area can be detected more easily and more quickly. We are evaluating whether we will expand coverage into southwestern Yukon and into Atlantic Canada, but that's still under evaluation. So the earthquake alerts will be based on magnitude, so the size of the earthquake, and intensity, which is the strength of shaking. And we will only be sending alerts out if the earthquake is potentially harmful. So sometimes you might feel a little bit of shaking and not receive an alert. It's because it wasn't really going to be hazardous to you. We'll be sending alerts to the public via the National Public Alerting System. That's used currently for severe weather and amber alerts, that sort of thing. The distribution will be through radio, television, cellular phone, possibly internet. We'll also be sending alerts directly to critical infrastructure operators so that they can trigger automated actions. And these are the sorts of actions we want to trigger. So opening fire hall and ambulance bay doors so that those doors don't jam shut and the vehicles can still get out. Closing valves so that you're protecting your water sources, so you're not allowing hazardous chemicals to leak onto the environment. Moving elevators to the nearest floor and opening their doors so people don't get trapped. Having an alarm in a hospital so that surgery is stopped, the patient is covered and secured. Slowing or stopping trains, planes, and automobiles. Huge difference. There was recently, just actually a few weeks ago, an earthquake in Japan. They stopped the trains and several of the tracks had been damaged. Had those trains not been stopped, they would have derailed and there could have been quite significant injuries and possibly even worse. So these things that take only a few seconds can really dramatically reduce damages and injuries. And then parking hard drives, it may sound a bit funny, but you want to protect your data so that you can still operate after an earthquake occurred. So people, of course, will, as I showed before, drop, cover, and hold on. So there will be alerts to say your cell phone so that to tell you to do that. It gives you a few precious seconds. Here's an example. I mentioned the 1973 earthquake that was felt in your area. If we had the warning system operating then, Vancouver and Victoria would get 40 to 50 seconds of warning. Unfortunately, Cumberland is within the late alert zone for that earthquake, so no warning. But if you think instead about an earthquake in the Victoria area, we wouldn't get much warning, but you would get about 40 to 50 seconds worth of warning. So having this warning system in place will warn for all sorts of different earthquakes around British Columbia. Another example would be for the magnitude 8.1 earthquake that happened in 1949, felt quite broadly, as you can see from the shake map there. And that would have caused 9 seconds of warning to Masset and Skidegate and about 43 seconds for Prince Rupert. So this early warning system for me is extremely exciting. As a seismologist, this is something I've really wanted, and it's great to see this technology is coming to Canada. So I thank you very much for listening to me, and I do welcome your questions. Let's see if maybe I should stop sharing. And there we go.
We have had a couple questions come in, and I'll just remind everybody who's joined us this evening that at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a Q&A feature. If you have a question for Alison, you can just pop it in there and we'll get to them. So the first question that's come in says, I keep my earthquake kit in the garage. If it's one of the likely places to collapse, where is it recommended to keep it? Great question.
I don't think your garage will necessarily collapse, but it might have significant damage. So I would certainly keep it away from the big door of the garage and closer to the house. Or I don't have a garage, but I do have a carport, and I every time I look at that, I think that's not going to do well in a really big earthquake. So I keep my kit. I have a basement suite, so I keep my kit in what I feel is the sturdiest room at the basement suite. It's actually the guest room, and I can get to that through the house, or I can break a window and get to it from the garden. I had wanted to keep our kit in our garden shed because I feel like even with my wimpy muscles, I could get to that if something happened. But we'd had a few issues with little creatures, and we didn't want any little creatures partaking in our kit. So we decided not to put it in the shed. But it depends what your house is laid out like. Sometimes under the stairs, that's quite a sturdy part of the house. If that's accessible, making sure that it's accessible is really key. A lot of people keep them in their cloak closet where, because it's by the door and it's a little storage area. So that's another idea.
Amazing. Thanks, Alison. The next question says, do tall trees tend to fall in subduction or crustal quakes? We have many tall evergreens close to our house, and I think this is probably lots of folks have lots of trees near their homes in this area.
Yeah, I certainly do. Actually, they tend to do quite well because they're anchored nicely with the root system. When they tend to fall is when they're part of like a slump or a landslide. And usually in that situation, that the slide or the slump is more of an issue for you than the tree falling. But it can be a concern. But if you're on level ground and and you're in fairly firm ground, your trees should do okay.
Great, thank you. This next question was just about, I think, your slide referencing why Cumberland had no warning, and that was just specific to that earthquake example.
Yeah, that was for that specific earthquake. Other earthquakes, Cumberland will have a warning. It's just that because of that earthquake was right under Cumberland, Cumberland would be within the late alert zone for that earthquake. But most earthquakes, you will get an alert. And the further away the earthquake is, the more alert you will get.
Are our utility lines, particularly gas lines, liable to be damaged in an earthquake?
Well, Vancouver Island is lucky because we got gas later than the mainland. And most of our gas lines are actually flexible. So they're less likely to be damaged than, say, the more brittle lines that are in place in Vancouver. But it's still a good idea to keep a wrench for shutting your gas off available, and make sure that the people in your house know how to use it, and that they only use it if they smell gas. Because if you turn it off, that's one thing, but you cannot turn it back on again. A Fortis or whatever worker has to come to your house to turn it back on, and they've got to do each house individually. So it's best not to turn it off unless there's a gas leak. And of course, it's got that awful rotten egg smell. So yeah, it's hard to miss it.
Thank you so much. It's great to know. The next question is actually going to be for Howie. This is, we know we have a few days of supplies on hand, but what plans does the CVRD, the city and the province implement in the event of a large quake? Are there designated evacuation areas, for example? Excellent question.
It is an excellent question. Yeah, so for an earthquake, we do advanced planning. We just finished our big regional exercise, full scale exercise for our fracture on 5th, which is based on an earthquake. It is a bit of a challenge for us to actually predict where the impacts will be from an earthquake. So we just really look at what we can have sort of in place for most hazard events that we have that don't have such as large impact so immediately to the community. So we do have reception centers established throughout the Comox Valley in all the local government areas, as well as electoral areas, and on Denman and Hornby Island. We don't promote these because we don't want people to go to them unless we can determine if they are safe and the routes to them are safe. So again, we don't publicize them to the public. But if you're wanting to go to our emergency management website, we do post a lot of our plans and guidelines that we have created for public knowledge. It's really will help you in your planning process. So I encourage that you can do that as well, or just call our office and we'd be happy to speak with anybody, and more specifically to maybe your neighborhood or the area of the Comox Valley that you live.
Yeah. As Howie said, we have some great resources on our website, which we've shared the links in the chat. So if anybody's interested to go and look at those, we've supplied them for you there. And as Howie said, you can always give us a call. How useful is strapping the house joists to the foundation? What about support columns? So this one more for Alison, maybe.
Yep. Well, it's been part of the code since about the 70s. It is a good idea if you've got an older home to have that home strapped to its foundation. One of my earlier images from the 1946 earthquake showed a house that had been shuffled off its foundation because it hadn't been strapped, because in the 1940s they didn't strap their houses. So it does make a big difference, especially that lower story, if it's secured to the foundation, and if there's shear strength added to that lower floor, it makes a big difference to even how the upper floors behave. That lower floor is the most key in earthquake resistance. So if you strap your house to its foundation, it's especially nice if you have an unfinished basement. And then also if you put extra plywood sheeting on the walls, especially if you use screws, not nails, makes a big difference.
Okay. The last question that we have in the Q&A right now, unless anybody else wants to pop a question in, is that you mentioned Ontario. Compared to BC, how vulnerable is it to earthquakes?
It's not as vulnerable, but it is. It does have earthquakes. The earthquakes are a little smaller. They don't certainly have the dramatic subduction zone style or anything like that, but they do have earthquakes that can get big. And the thing is that the style of construction in Eastern Canada is different out here. We have a lot of wood frame construction. It's light, it's a little flexible, and it's quite different. But in there, they've got a lot more masonry, stone or brick, and that's a lot more vulnerable to damage. So even though the earthquakes are smaller, they have nearly as much hazard in terms of what would happen in an earthquake.
Okay. What about houses that are just built on a slab?
They can still be built strapped to the slab, and I would think that if it's 1970s or later, it should have that sort of bolting to the slab. Okay.
Any suggestions specifically for multi-story, multi-family homes, example stratas, apartment buildings, duplexes, etc.?
Oh, I wanted to mention that, yes, the Prepared BC do have a preparedness guide for specifically condo and townhouse dwellers. So great resource for that. So and maybe you can get together with your neighbors and look at that together and make your plans and all that.
And the last question we've got here in the Q&A this evening is there a benefit to having a post and pier foundation during an earthquake?
Here.
Post and pier.
Oh dear. Sorry, can you
A
specify?
I wish I had one of our planners here with us. They might be able to.
Yeah, I'm not an earthquake engineer. And yes, I don't. I'm trying to think of post and pier. Is that when it's
a post? Maybe post and beam. I'm not sure if the person,
sorry,
the person who entered the question, if you would like to email us, we're happy to get back to you with that. I've added my email into the chat. It's there for you if you want to email. I will pass that on to a building engineer and we'll be able to answer that. One more question has come in. Are water lines vulnerable in an earthquake?
Yes. Yeah. In an earlier image, I showed that, Christchurch was without water for a while. That's why we really encourage you to have water as part of your kit, and not just for consumption, like not just for drinking, but also for bathing. Hygiene is very important. And actually this brings to mind, in Fort McMurray, when they had their fires and people were evacuating, there were a lot of eye infections because people who wear contact lenses didn't have their solution in their little kit. So thinking about these things for hygiene, as well as, making sure you can eat and those sorts of things, warmth, having clothes for different seasons are all really important. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. One more question, and we're going to take the questions if they keep rolling in until 8. How do septic fields do?
Oh, septic fields, I'm not entirely sure. I think that's the one where I'll have to get back to you. I'm sorry. Please email me or Ingrid and we'll find you the answers to that. I know that wells and other ponds and things can get churned up with the earthquakes, the shaking, and the sediment can get churned up. So if you have like a well, that's a problem. And it can actually take a few days or even longer for things to settle down again. But septic fields, I'm not sure of. I don't have any experience with that one. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And like Alison said, we can definitely get back to you on that if you want to email us. There's no more questions in the chat at the moment. So we're just going to, if anybody else has anything they want to ask. Oh, no, here we go. Another one has come in. Can you say a bit more about what you did to protect yourself from a falling chimney? Oh, very good question. Sure. Yeah, you said you had installed some stuff in your roof.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we do use our chimney. I did actually visit friends who bought a really old house in Seattle, and right when they bought it, they had me down for a visit. I think mostly because they wanted to pick my brain, but we walked around their basement. And I was talking to them about bolting their house to its foundation, because it was a very old house. It was sort of an arts and crafts, and they had a chimney that went right up in the middle of the house. It was sort of in the corner of the kitchen in a very awkward area. And I said, what does this chimney do? I said, oh, there used to be a furnace that used the chimney, but it's not used anymore. I said, get rid of it. That is probably your biggest hazard. And they got rid of it, and they have a much more better layout in the kitchen, and they don't have that hazard. I do use my chimney. So what I did was, well, I didn't, because I don't like going into the attic, if I'm completely honest. I got someone else to go up into the attic with some good sturdy planks, and he screwed the planks down, because of course, remember that strong side to side motion, you don't want those planks moving away from the chimney before it collapses. So they're screwed to the
joists.
The word, thank you. The joists. There's the planks are screwed to the joist, so that if the chimney falls toward the house, then comes into the attic, that they don't punch through and end up in our lounge where we're sitting or trying to protect ourselves. Because of course bricks are fairly heavy items, and I don't really want them coming down on us. If it falls away from the house, it's going to probably damage our front deck. our front, which we hardly ever use anyway. And so we won't be able to use that front door for a while until that's rebuilt. But yeah, just thinking, go if you do what we call a hazard hunt, walk around your house, think, okay, what could shift? Take down the heavy picture from over the head of your bed. I know it looks nice, but there's a 1 in 3 chance you're going to be in bed during an earthquake, and you don't want that coming down on your head. Just look at what might shift. What's heavy? What should be moved down low? Go into your kids' rooms. Is the child's bed underneath the window? Move it away from the window. Little things like this make a huge difference. I have all of my heavy furniture and appliances strapped to studs. My water heater is strapped to a stud. It stops it from falling over and damaging my office. It's in corner of my office, but also it protects that source of water too. That's water that I can use after an earthquake. So all these little things you can do means that you're going to be a lot more comfortable. You're going to be a lot more safe. It's going to be less of an ordeal.
And those are such great tips. Are they available in the guides that the province puts out?
I believe a lot of them are, and some of them on the Shake Out BC website. If you go to that, there are some tips there on how to secure your space. I think we've got 9 steps to earthquake safety, little things like that, just to help you along.
Great. And we have links to all of these on our website as well, if anybody needs to reference them. And I'll just put the Shakeout BC in the chat as well for everyone. So another question has come in. What is the risk of a large earthquake to the east side of Vancouver Island in the next 20 years? Can we predict that?
20 years is a tough. I know that there's about a 1 in 3 chance in 50 years. I just, and I know that doesn't sound like very high odds, but if you had a lottery with those kind of odds, you'd be buying a ticket. These are actually quite high odds. I just assume it's going to happen because then I know I'm ready for it. And I know I think about earthquakes constantly, but it's actually a relatively high odd. In a typical Cascadia quake. Oh, wow, that's a really great question.
I'm going to read this one out loud so everybody can hear it. In a typical Cascadia quake, how big is the lateral side-to-side movement? Wow, we've got somebody who knows their stuff.
Oh, that's a really great question. I don't even know the answer.
You stumped Alison.
You have. I'd have to calculate that. I do know that if you look at the fact that the subduction zone, that the 2 plates are coming together at about 4 or 5 centimeters per year. So that's about the same speed that your fingernails grow. Now they've been coming together for over 300 years. So 300 years times say 4.5 centimeters is, quickly do the math. Oh, under pressure. Yes, several meters. So, or about 15 meters. So that's a lot. So that's how much the movement this way would be, but it'd be in one go. But the actual shaking side to side is not so much. It's hard to describe how you'd feel it. The closer you are to the earthquake, the more jiggly it is, the higher frequency. The further you are away from the earthquake, the more it's swaying instead of jiggly motion. I'm using really technical terms here. And that's why when you're further away from the earthquake, it can actually be a little bit, people can get motion sick. There are actually some of the indigenous stories about the last megathrust talk about the ones in the communities on the mainland, talk about, people were feeling sick because they were motion sick. It was like they were on the high seas. I actually experienced this myself when I was on Haida Gwaii. I felt an aftershock, and I was far enough away, but it was just for this weird circular, woozy motion. I was in a truck, and oh man, I did not feel well. It did not feel like I was expecting it to feel. It was this really strange motion. So yeah, it depends on where you are in relation to the earthquake too.
Wow, so fascinating. Really awesome question. If there's any more questions for Alison, now is your moment to pop them in. We've got about 8 minutes left in our webinar this evening.
I'm going to take it, Ingrid, I'm just going to use the opportunity. I get asked a lot, and with Alison here being the expert, is that after the big one, people have asked me, will Vancouver Island settle back because it's being pushed up? So I think this is a good, for me to go out and do my presentations, it's good to have the word of the expert. So.
Okay, so yes, Vancouver Island's being pushed up and a little bit east. After the earthquake, it will settle, but not as much as people think. The west coast of the island might drop down by about a meter or so. So you may not notice it unless, of course, you've got waterfront property. And then, the further east, it's going to be like a few centimeters. It's not going to be that noticeable. It's not going to be a case where suddenly Vancouver Island's underwater or any of these other myths. There's one myth that, people seem to think that it's the top of a mushroom and it's going to slip off. And it's like, if I thought that, I would never live here. No, it's one of these things. There will be some dropping down, but it's mostly on that far west coast and about a meter. Around Victoria, I think it's something like 10-15 centimeters. It's not very much. So it won't be a huge difference.
Great, thank you. I think you just busted all the myths that I've always have to challenge. So great, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, since we don't seem to have any more questions coming in, I'm going to pass it over to Howie, who's going to just close us off with a big thank you to Alison.
Well, before I want to do that, Alison got me thinking early when she's talked about the resiliency for community and working together to be prepared. And so I wanted just an opportunity to let people know we have a neighborhood emergency preparedness program that we've just refreshed and are trying to make it more inviting, more user-friendly. So if something that you want to work with your community, your neighborhood, your street, your townhouse, your strata, we can come out and do presentations and provide you some information. And then I know she's already done it. She's going to put the link into the page for us. So thank you. We have some workshops coming up that you can sign up for and attend. So I think that's right along with Alison's presentation now, because after an earthquake, we'll be depending on each other and staying in our communities to help each other. So I think it just ties right in really well for here. So thanks for that, Alison. Thanks for the presentation. It's always great to sit and listen to you. I think I might have sat through about 30 of these workshops and sessions with you over the years, but I always picked up something more information, and you always deliver them with a sense of joy and passion for what you do. And I think that's what really makes an enjoyable presentation to follow. So thank you very much for attending today and presenting the information to us.
Thank you, Howie. It's my pleasure, and always a joy to work with the people at Comox.
So yeah, if you have final words you want to say before we do close off the webinar, feel free.
Just get prepared and drop, cover, hold on.
Right, yeah, right on. That's your slogan. So thank you very much again. I also just want to remind everybody that the recording will be uploaded to the website for you to view at your own leisure again. I'm sure there's lots of information, lots of great questions that you may want to go back and look at, but also offer it to your friends, your family, your coworkers. Again, the more that we educate ourselves and we take the time to do so, the better we'll be during an earthquake, but any kind of hazard that might come our way into the Comox Valley. So again, I thank you very much, Alison. I'd like to thank my communications team for supporting me on the webinar. This is kind of my first one hosting with all this technology, so definitely appreciate all the support in doing that and putting the work behind that. So, and also want to thank the participants who joined us tonight. I think we were up around 50, if I remember counting. So that's great to see. Great to see the interest. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great rest of the night. And again, yeah, take care and get prepared. Drop, cover, and hold if you have an earthquake. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.